And here we go, Alana. 3, 2, 1. You're here. How are you tonight? You got to hit on mute, please.
How's that?
That's great. How are you tonight?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much, Jay. It's an honor to be here.
You know, it's great to have you. I want to remind everyone why we're doing this. It's not just for another technology conference. It's to help raise money for the WHO. And we're really, really thankful that you're one of the people that just joined us in helping not only gain attention to the technology you want to talk about or the other things, but just getting attention to help get everybody together. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here. What a great lineup of speakers.
Yeah, I've really been impressed. Patrick and the rest of the team really outdid themselves. So why don't you go ahead and start sharing your screen? While you do that, I'm going to take a moment to show. I want to thank all of our sponsors. All of our sponsors have really been helpful in making sure that we're given money. And I know that Patrick and everyone really spent a lot of time getting this together and making sure that we've had an opportunity to get you all some awesome information. So I'm going to kick it back to Alana, who is going to really be not only awesome, but helpful in this time where we need someone to give us some great information. So I'm gonna move along for a little while. I'm gonna give you your talk.
Thank you.
Alana Brown, thank you very much.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in at the late hour if you're on the West Coast or East Coast. My name is Alana Brown and I work for a company called Puppet. Little known fact about me, you may have caught Gene's talk and you mentioned the State of DevOps Report. Well, I actually started the State of DevOps Report 8 years ago, and today it is the longest standing, most widely referenced piece of research on the topic of DevOps today. So very proud of that. I have spent the past 8 years surveying over 33,000 technical professionals from all around the world. Thank you if you've taken the survey. I've also worked very closely with many of you in the DevOps community and with our Puppet customers, which comprise some of the largest, most complex organizations in the world. So I've really seen firsthand how organizations adopt and scale DevOps practices, where they get stuck, and the outcomes they see when they're able to move beyond some of the barriers. So our last report is the 2019 State of DevOps Report, and it focuses on what I think is one of the most challenging aspects of security, of DevOps, which is integrating security practices and policies into the software delivery lifecycle. And security is often seen as a bottleneck in the DevOps initiative. But our research really shows that integrating security early and often actually delivers real results, even if the path to get there isn't straightforward. So why is it so hard to integrate security into the software delivery lifecycle? I really, truly believe that DevOps is first and foremost about people and culture. And culture is largely defined by how you incentivize people to do their work. And if you think about it, DevOps teams are incentivized to build and deliver new features, as Jay was saying earlier, so they can get to market faster. And this is the thing that gives companies their competitive edge in this day and age. Security, on the other hand, isn't a competitive differentiator for most companies. So the bottom line is that good security doesn't pay the bills, and so it doesn't get prioritized by the business. But why should we care about this in the first place? Well, from a business perspective, integrating quality and security earlier in the software delivery lifecycle is so much cheaper than the waterfall alternative. According to this study by IBM System Science Institute that was done a little while ago, but I've seen it validated across other studies, it costs 6 times more to fix a bug found during implementation, 15 times more to fix that same bug in testing, and 100 times more once the code is running in production. So as you can see, building security in from the start is simply a good business practice. But look, I get it. This is not easy. We actually recently collaborated with Snyk on their DevSecOps report, which is based on the State of DevOps Report and their 2019 State of Open Source Security Report. It is a fantastic read, so I highly recommend it if you haven't taken a look yet. But they found that not only are the number of vulnerabilities exponentially increasing year after year, but the majority of those vulnerabilities are actually found in indirect dependencies. Furthermore, most developers aren't implementing sufficient testing to catch those vulnerabilities. And even if they are aware that the vulnerabilities exist, it can take years for them to actually fix them. And, this is so common. I was talking to one of our customers recently, and he was telling me that they can only fix about 10% of their vulnerabilities today because they have a ton of heavy manual process and a lot of bureaucracy in general. And the business really never wants to take down a revenue generating app ever. So it can take 90 to 180 days to get an open window to do the patching. So I just want to jump into some of the key findings from the report. And the first finding may seem obvious, but we found that if you're doing DevOps well, you're probably doing security well. And if you're doing security well, you're probably already doing DevOps well. So let's talk about what that means. In our 2018 State of DevOps report, we looked at the evolution of DevOps as organizations adopt and scale their DevOps practices. And we found that there are actually 5 distinct stages in the DevOps evolution. And at the most advanced stages, it's really interesting because firms are starting to apply more automation to security considerations. So the teams are automating their security policy configurations. They've automated their incident response, and the security teams are deeply involved in the technology design and deployment. And this makes a ton of sense. If you already have all of these foundational DevOps practices in place, then your application, your application and infrastructure code are already in version control. You're doing continuous integration with automated testing. You've automated your deployments. Then really making a security related change is no different than making any other change in your system. So our 2018 report has a lot more prescriptive guidance on each of these stages. So I recommend checking that out if you're interested in learning more about the DevOps evolution model. All right, so this chart, it's a little hard to read, but it shows how the percentage of orgs that are highly evolved in terms of their DevOps practices, it actually increases at each level of security integration. So we overlaid those two things. And as you can see from level 5, the highest level of integration, 22% of firms at the highest level of security integration are also at a very advanced stage of DevOps evolution. So our second finding is that we also found that as security becomes more integrated, confidence in security posture actually improves. Again, this should be pretty obvious to anyone who's been paying attention to DevOps in the last couple of years. There's a reason why collaboration is one of the pillars of DevOps. It's because collaboration builds trust and trust builds confidence. So what this is showing us is that 81%, or 82%, if you look at the far right at the blue bar, 82% of the respondents at firms with high levels of integration felt that their security policies and practices actually significantly improve their security posture. Compare that with respondents at firms with no security integration, which is that red bar, level 1. Just 38% had that level of confidence. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually more secure, because that's something that's very hard to measure. But what's more important here, I think, is the shift in mindset. When there is no integration, there's usually a lack of understanding of the work involved in security, and also, to be frank, a lot of cynicism around it. But when teams are fully integrated, there's a mutual understanding. People feel like the things they're being asked to do really do matter, which makes them more likely to do them. So we wanted to know which practices actually had the greatest impact on the team's confidence. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, interestingly, the practices that require really strong collaboration up front were actually the top confidence builders. So it's not just about shifting security checks to the left. It's about fundamentally changing how everyone works together at the beginning of the pipeline. So the top 5 practices that improve security posture are security and development teams collaborate on threat models. And threat models are a great exercise. So for anyone who's doing that today, kudos to you. It can be awkward at first, but I've heard from a lot of people that once they get into it, it's actually a really meaningful exercise for the whole team. Security tools are integrated in the development integration pipeline, and that's so engineers can be confident that they're not actually inadvertently introducing known security problems into their code bases. Security requirements are prioritized as part of the product backlog, which both assumes an agile way of working and includes both functional and non-functional requirements as well. Infrastructure-related security policies are reviewed before deployment. Again, there is the assumption that the infrastructure teams are working really closely with the security teams to make sure that those reviews are happening. And security tests evaluate automated, or security experts evaluate automated tests. And this means that they are able to review the tests, and then they're called to manually review things that are high risk, such as authentication systems, cryptography, etc., versus reviewing all the minutia. So I'll say it again, collaboration builds trust and trust builds confidence. Okay, so our third key finding is that integrating security actually leads to positive business outcomes. So I know this is a lot to look at, but at the highest level of security integration, firms are actually able to deploy on demand more frequently than their peers. Now, we have always asked about deployment frequency, but this year we asked 2 questions about deployment frequency. How often can you deploy? Versus how often do you actually deploy? Because nowadays we know of enough organizations that can deploy more frequently than the business or their customers even require. So oftentimes they're told to hold on that deployment. So if you just focus on that teal bar on the far left, you can see that 61% of the highly integrated organizations are able to deploy on demand compared to 49% of organizations with no integration. And that is significantly higher than firms at all other levels of integration. So at the highest levels of security integration, firms are also able to remediate critical vulnerabilities faster. There are a couple of interesting things that I want to point out here. The first is that only about 7% of the total population are actually able to remediate vulnerabilities in less than 1 hour. The majority of the respondents, where you can see the bars go up quite a bit, are able to remediate a critical vulnerability in less than 1 week. But the main takeaway for me looking at this chart is that it is actually very hard to reduce the time it takes to remediate vulnerabilities because there are just so many roadblocks involved and too many factors, too many stakeholders, handoffs, approvals, etc. So it is really difficult to shrink that time. However, you know, any reduction is considered to be good because it does reduce your company's risk for exposure. And so the differences that you're seeing here, though they aren't as dramatic as we would like to see, they are statistically significant. Okay, so if you caught the last talk, Jay brought up a really good point about feature delivery. And at the highest levels of security integration, firms are actually able to prioritize feature delivery or security improvements over feature delivery. So just take a minute and imagine that you're asked to choose between making some sort of security improvement versus shipping a brand new feature that your customers have been asking for and that will help you make your quarter. I think it's pretty obvious that most businesses would choose the latter. But we asked a series of questions like this, and we found that firms that had deeper security integration were actually more likely to prioritize security improvements over feature delivery. And additionally, they're also able to stop a push to production more effectively if they do find a critical security vulnerability. So imagine again, you're about to push this new feature, the money-making one, to production, and you discover a critical vulnerability at that point. What would you do? Well, hopefully, most people would stop the train, but the organizations at the highest level of integration are much more likely to do that for all types of security issues, which I thought was interesting. So far, I've painted a pretty rosy picture here, but the reality is that integrating security into the software delivery lifecycle, especially when teams are so deeply siloed and processes have been ingrained for so long, it's actually really messy, especially during the middle stages. So what's happening here is when you're just starting out, you don't really know what you don't know. And as you start to dig a little bit deeper, for a lot of organizations, it feels like they're opening up Pandora's box, and all of like the process, the duct tape, the glue that's been holding all of this together is suddenly way out in the open. And we've seen this in past reports as well. It's called the J curve, if you imagine like a J or Nike swoosh. And it means that at first things start out well because you're starting to see some quick wins, but then they start to take a turn for the worse before they start to get better again. So one of the questions we asked was if security teams encounter friction when collaborating with delivery teams. And as you can see from this chart, friction is higher in the middle, and it never really fully goes away, even when the teams are fully integrated. But when we compared the security roles versus the non-security roles, it was really interesting that the friction was even higher for security teams in those middle stages. And understanding that DevOps is really fundamentally about cultural change, it's so important to remember that different teams will experience this change differently. One of the big reasons we hear for not integrating security is that it'll slow things down. And again, we see here that at level 3, people really do feel like security is a constraint on delivering their software quicker. So yes, maybe it does slow things down for a bit because you're trying to figure things out and trying to build your pipelines and things like that. But ultimately, once you get past that, it's really not any more or less slow than no integration. And ultimately, the outcome should be better when security is built in. So increasing security integration also doesn't reduce the number of issues that require immediate correction that arise from audits. The path is, again, hardest at levels 2 and 3. But when we look at the number of audits firms are performing at each of these different levels, it actually turns out that at the very highest levels, firms are actually doing more audits per year, since oftentimes audits can be elective and the degree of difficulty for some audits is also selective. So to wrap up, security integration into DevOps practices actually does result in better business outcomes and can transition you away from security theater to actually having a stronger security posture. Unfortunately, the research also shows that most organizations are stuck in the middle. So the question is, how do you get unstuck? Well, there's lots of great details in the report, which you can download online. But to summarize, it's about dev, security, and ops teams collaborating deeply from the start and automating across the entire delivery pipeline. This is a cultural and process change, which can be facilitated with better tool integration and collaboration across DevSec and Ops teams. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
And we are so thankful for you. And Q&A won't start in 5 minutes. Q&A will start right now. Let me just change this little banner. So first, let me just say that always interesting from hearing about the State of DevOps report. I think that's a really, really huge part of some interesting data that comes out of our industry. Really big. First, let's see what's going on with the questions. All right, so far no questions, so I want to ask a few more.
Sure,
Okay.
Go for it.
So first of all, one of the cool things that I know about the way, I guess, motivated teams are working now is that they are really motivated via communication. Do you feel like that's really reflected enough in some of the data that's collected that communication is a real driver of this improvement of teams that adopt DevOps?
I think traditionally in the systems world, there hasn't been a lot of communication outbound to the other teams because, traditionally IT has been seen as a cost center versus a center of value. But I think that's really changing a lot. And the places that I see it that are really interesting are things like job descriptions, where, communication skills is really important. Or when I talk to CIOs or VPs, they all want people who can communicate the value of the technology versus talking about the technology itself. So I think there's a real realization in the industry that communication is really key. And it's one of the core tenets of collaboration.
Thank you. That's a great thing to hear. If I've learned anything in working in operations teams, especially around high, expected uptime. It's one of those things that if you're not communicating as a team, you're not winning because you're going to simply just miss out on the important things that get lost in the sauce. Is the only way to describe it. And without teams having great communication, you're simply going to, I think, lose out.
Totally agree with that. And, we've seen the chat ops movement blow up over the past couple of years. And I think that's just another indicator. But automating that communication, making it super easy and current, and contextual, I think is also important. And I think that's why chat ops has gotten so big.
Yeah, my buddy Jason Hand has written a lot around that. I'm very lucky that he and I have traveled the world together and have talked a lot about the benefits of reducing the amount of minutia that goes into executing something that's very important, whether it's a new deploy or a modification of an application. Chat ops and responsiveness through automation, I think, has really improved the lives of people in ops. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, I think it's a huge force multiplier for a lot of people, and it's contextual. That's the most important thing. Well,
what I want to do is thank you. I think we're all set for your time. Let me see if we have any more questions. No, we're great. So I want to thank you so much for being here with me, Alana. To bring us back, I want to continue with my theme before I leave you. Hold on one moment. Bring up the band again. So, Alana, thank you so much for being part of all the talks. It's been really great to have you, and like everyone else, I hope that you're doing well, you're living safe, and you and your family and everyone that you care about are making through this really weird time. Thank you very much for being part of it.
Same to you, Jay, and I'm going to be donating right after this. So Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Hey.